Chapter 1. A Fist in the Dust. The sun beat down hard on the main street of Red Rock, turned the air into a wavering haze above the dirt road. Horses stood tethered outside the saloon, tails flicking at flies, while a few townsfolk lingered on porches, half hidden in the shade. The air smelled of sweat, whiskey, and dust, thick with the tension of a town that had seen too many brawls and not enough law. Clara stumbled out from the general store, a worn bonnet clutched in her hands. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set. Behind her came Tobias Kane, a gambler with a mean grin and sharper fists. He moved quick, his hand clamping down on her arm. "You owe me, girl," Kane snarled, his voice dripping with menace. "Your pa's debts don't vanish just 'cause he's 6 feet under." Clara twisted free, her breath coming ragged. "I don't owe you a thing, Kane. My father never." The words ended in a sharp gasp as Kane's fist struck her cheek, knocking her back into the dirt. The street went quiet. A pair of old men on the saloon porch shifted uncomfortably but didn't move. The piano inside kept playing, though slower now, as if the player's hands had turned cautious. Clara pressed a hand to her cheek, dirt sticking to her skin, eyes flashing with fury and shame. Then the crowd parted. A man had been leaning against a hitching post, hat tipped low, watching. His spurs jingled as he stepped forward, boots grinding the dust. Broad-shouldered, sunburned, with a steady look of someone who'd seen his share of trouble, Jack Harlow didn't say a word until he was standing right between Kane and Clara. "That's far enough," Jack said, his voice even, but carrying across the hushed street. Kane sneered. "Ain't your business. Cowboy, this is between me and the girl." Jack's eyes flicked to Clara, her trembling hands, the stubborn way she lifted her chin despite the tears threatening to spill. Then he turned back to Kane, and the heat in his gaze could have scorched leather. Without warning, Kane lunged. Jack's fist met him first. The crack of bone echoed like a gunshot as Kane's nose split under the blow. Blood sprayed, and Kane staggered back, cursing and clutching his face. The onlookers gasped. One woman dropped her basket of apples. They rolled into the dirt, forgotten. Jack didn't move toward Kane again. Instead, he knelt beside Clara, offering his hand. She hesitated, then took it, her small fingers gripping his rough palm. Jack rose with her, turning to face the gambler, his voice calm but ironclad. "She's got me now," he said, words steady as a drawn gun. "That's all you need." Silence hung for a heartbeat, broken only by the restless snort of a horse. Then, as Kane stumbled away with curses and bloodied pride, the town exhaled. But Clara didn't look at the retreating man. Her wide eyes stayed on Jack, searching his face, as if trying to decide whether he was a savior or a new kind of trouble. Chapter 2. A Shelter in Shadows. The saloon door swung shut behind them with a groan of old hinges. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke, whiskey fumes, and the low hum of conversation. The piano player struck a few uneasy notes, then picked up his rhythm again, though his eyes kept darting toward a tall cowboy guiding the bruised young woman to a chair. Jack pulled one out near the wall, away from the rowdy gamblers and girls draped across patrons' laps. "Sit," he said gently, his voice more suggestion than command. Clara lowered herself. One hand still pressed to her cheek, where Kane's fist had landed. A barmaid appeared, curiosity in her eyes. Jack reached into his vest and dropped a coin on her tray. "Water. Cold as you've got." The barmaid nodded and slipped away, heels tapping the creaky floorboards. Clara tried to speak, but stopped, lips trembling. Jack leaned on the table, his broad hands folded loosely, eyes steady on hers. "You don't owe me thanks," he said quietly, "but you ought to tell me why that snake thought he had the right to strike you." Her throat bobbed. She glanced around the room, at the gamblers watching from the far table, at the girls whispering behind their hands. Then she looked back at him, her voice raw. My pa, he gambled too much. Lost the ranch piece by piece, until there was nothing left but debt. Kane says I carry it now. The barmaid returned with a glass beating with cool water. Clara took it with shaking fingers, drinking as though she hadn't tasted fresh water in days. Jack's jaw tightened. He leaned back in his chair, boots scraping softly against the floor. Kane's a liar, he said flatly. Ain't no law in the territory that binds a daughter to a dead man's debts. Clara's eyes glistened, but she didn't let tears fall. She pressed the glass to her cheek, savoring its chill. Law don't mean much when men like him carry pistols and half the town looks the other way. Jack studied her for a long moment. The saloon felt heavier, as if the shadows leaned closer to hear. His voice dropped to a near growl. Then he's going to find out I don't look the other way. Clara blinked, startled, as though unused to anyone standing on her side. She set the glass down carefully, hands folded over one another to still their shaking. Why? She whispered. You don't even know me. Jack gave a slow shrug, the corner of his mouth pulling into the ghost of a smile. Maybe I don't, but I know right from wrong. And I ain't about to sit quiet while a good woman's crushed under a snake's boot. Her lips parted, a mix of disbelief and something softer flickering in her eyes. The piano tune swelled again, masking the hush between them. Outside, the wind pushed dust down the street, rattling the saloon windows. Trouble was brewing in Red Rock, and both of them knew Kane wasn't done. But for the first time in years, Clara felt a sliver of safety, a stranger's shadow cast across hers, shielding her from the storm. Chapter 3, Horses at Midnight. The moon rose silver over Prairie, casting the land in a pale glow. Jack's ranch sat on the edge of Red Rock, a lonely stretch of land framed by weather-worn fences, and the restless murmur of cattle in the pens. The night air was cooler than the day's blazing sun, but the wind carried unease, like whispers on the back of a coyote's howl. Clara helped Jack spread fresh hay in the barn, her hands moving with practiced care, despite the bruise shadowing her cheek. The lantern swung overhead, light painting her face in gold and shadow. Jack watched her for a moment before turning back to the nervous horses shifting in their stalls. They can feel it, Jack muttered, running a hand down the flank of his chestnut mare. Something's coming. As if to prove him right, a faint thunder of hooves echoed across the plain. Clara froze, pitchfork clattering to the floor. Jack grabbed a lantern and stepped outside, his eyes narrowing toward the horizon. Four riders circled just beyond the fence line, their silhouettes black against the moonlight. One let out a sharp whistle that cut across the stillness. "They're Kane's men," Clara whispered, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "They've come to scare us." Jack set the lantern on the fence post, his hand brushing the butt of his coat. "Scare maybe, but they know I don't scare easy." The riders wheeled their horses in a slow circle, dust rising in the moonlight. One called out, his voice carrying like a curse. "Cowboy, that girl brings more trouble than she's worth. Let her go, and we'll let you keep your land." Jack didn't answer. He rested one arm on the fence rail, posture calm, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. When the riders finally turned and galloped back into the dark, the night felt even heavier, as though the land itself was holding its breath. Inside the barn again, Clara picked up the fallen pitchfork with trembling hands. Jack watched her, then stepped close, gently taking it from her grasp. "You don't have to prove yourself to me," he said softly. Her eyes lifted to his, fierce despite the fear. "I've been fighting to survive since the day my pa buried us in debt. I won't be a burden." Jack's expression softened. He brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, callous fingers careful against her skin. "You're no burden, Clara. You're the strongest woman I've met." The words settled between them like sparks in dry grass, dangerous and alive. Outside, coyotes cried to the stars, and the lantern flickered in the barn, throwing their shadows long across the stalls. For the first time, Clara let herself lean into the quiet safety of his presence. And for Jack, hardened by years of wandering, the weight of her trust fell heavier and more precious than any gun he'd ever carried. Chapter 4, Blood and Gunpowder. Red Rock's main street shimmered under the noon sun, heat waves rising from the hard-packed dirt. The town seemed to hold its breath as word spread. Kane and his men were riding in. Shopkeepers pulled shutters closed, mothers yanked children inside, and the piano in the saloon stuttered to silence. By the time Jack and Clara stepped into the street, only shadows lingered at windows and behind swinging doors. The distant thunder of hooves grew louder until Kane appeared ahead of 5 riders, his face still swollen and bruised from Jack's punch. He dismounted with a sneer, spitting blood onto the dust. "Cowboy," he drawled, voice rough, "you made me bleed once. Today, I'll see you bleed twice over, and her with you." Jack's hand rested on his coat, calm as a coiled rattler. Clara stood just behind him, her shawl pulled tight, but her eyes didn't waver. She had chosen not to run. Kane flicked a hand, and his men spread out, revolvers gleaming in the sun. The silence grew unbearable. Only the creak of leather, the restless stamp of hooves, and the low whistle of wind carried through town. Jack finally spoke, his voice low, steady. "You've already lost, Kane. Everyone in this town saw what you are. A coward who hits women." The insult struck harder than a bullet. Kane's face twisted, and he went for his gun. The world exploded into sound. Gunfire cracked, echoing off false front buildings. Dust leapt from the street as bullets bit into wood and glass. Jack dropped to one knee, firing quick, precise shots that sent 2 of Kane's men scrambling for cover. Clara, heart pounding, darted toward the saloon porch where a rifle leaned forgotten against the rail. Her hands shook, but she lifted it, the stock pressing against her shoulder. Jack saw her, wide-eyed but resolute, and a fierce pride burned in him even as bullets hissed past. "Stay low," he shouted, returning fire. She did, but her fingers squeezed the trigger, the shot ringing out sharp and clean. One of Kane's riders yelped and fell from his saddle, horse bolting down the street. Kane cursed, fury boiling over, and charged straight at Jack. The 2 men collided, fists and elbows cracking, dust rising in a choking cloud. Jack's hat tumbled into the dirt as Kane's fist split his lip, but Jack drove forward, slamming the gambler into the side of a water trough, gun tumbling from Kane's grip. The crowd, once hidden, began peering out again, faces pale but eyes wide with awe. Clara kept a rifle leveled, her breath harsh her throat, ready if Jack faltered. But Jack didn't falter. With one final strike, he drove Kane down into the dust, holding him there with the barrel of his Colt pressed between the man's eyes. The street went silent, except for Jack's ragged breath. His voice cut through the stillness, cold as iron. "It ends here. You ever lay a hand on her, or anyone in this town, again, you won't walk away." Kane, bloodied and beaten, nodded once, fear finally breaking through his arrogance. Jack stepped back, lowering the Colt. Clara hurried to his side, rifle still trembling in her hands. When his eyes met hers, something unspoken passed between them, fierce, raw, and undeniable. And as the dust settled over Red Rock, the town knew. A line had been drawn in blood and gunpowder, and Jack Harlow had staked his claim. Chapter 5, Egg Kissed by the Campfire. The prairie night stretched wide and endless, stars burning like cold fire across the velvet sky. A small campfire flickered in the hollow of a creek bed, its glow throwing long shadows against the rocks. The smell of smoke mixed with sagebrush, and the soft crackle of flames was the only sound besides the distant yip of coyotes. Jack sat with his back against a log, shirt torn and streaked with dust, blood drying at the corner of his lip. Clara knelt beside him, dipping a cloth into a tin cup of water. Her hand steady though her heart beat like a trapped bird. "Hold still," she murmured, pressing the cloth gently against the cut on his cheek. Jack winced, but didn't pull away. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, never left her face. "You didn't have to come charging into that fight with a rifle," he said, voice rough but low, almost teasing. "Could have gotten yourself killed." Clara dabbed at his wound, meeting his gaze with quiet defiance. "And leave you to face them alone? Not a chance." For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the fire's pop. Jack reached up, catching her wrist lightly in his calloused hand. His touch was firm yet careful, as if he feared she might slip away like smoke. "You've got grit," he said softly, "more than most men I've ridden with." Her lips curved, faint but warm, though her eyes shone with something deeper than pride. "Maybe I've just been waiting for someone worth standing beside." The words hit him harder than any of Cain's blows. He dropped his hand, staring into the fire for a long moment. "I've been running here all my life," he admitted, voice low, drifting from one place to the next, never staying long enough to matter. "Truth is, I didn't think I had it in me to protect anyone, not anymore." Clara's fingers brushed his jaw, coaxing his eyes back to hers. "And yet, you stood up for me when no one else would. You matter, Jack, more than you know." The air between them tightened, heavy with things unspoken. Clara's face was close, the firelight dancing in her eyes. Jack searched her expression for hesitation, for doubt, but found none. Slowly, carefully, he leaned forward. Their lips met in a kiss that was neither rushed nor timid, but steady, an unspoken vow carved under the stars. Her hand slid to the back of his neck, his fingers tangling gently in her hair. The kiss deepened, lingering, as though both feared what tomorrow might take from them. When they finally drew apart, Clara rested her forehead against his, breath mingling with his own. "Whatever storm's coming," she whispered, "we'll face it together." Jack smiled then, a rare and unguarded thing. He pulled her closer against his chest, the fire warming their faces, the prairie vast and silent around them. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of loneliness lift. And beneath the endless wild west sky, love sparked like a flame that neither dust nor danger could snuff out. Chapter 6. The Ride into Tomorrow. Dawn painted the prairie in strokes of gold and rose, the kind of morning that carried both promise and reckoning. The embers of last night's fire smoldered in the creek bed, sending thin ribbons of smoke into the cool air. Clara stirred from where she had slept wrapped in Jack's coat, the wide brim of his hat shielding her eyes from the rising sun. Jack was already awake, saddling his chestnut mare. The quiet strength of his movement spoke of a man who had lived too many mornings alone, but now there was something different in his posture. Purpose instead of drift. Clara pushed to her feet, gathering her shawl tighter as she walked toward him. "You don't mean to just ride on, do you?" she asked, her voice soft but edged with fear. He turned, pausing as the sunlight caught his face. For a heartbeat he didn't answer, only looked at her as though weighing his words against the weight of the world. Then he set his hat low over his brow. "Not without you." The breath she had been holding escaped in a shaky laugh. "Then you're as foolish as I am." He grinned, the kind of smile that softened the hard lines of his face. "Maybe, but I reckon I'm done running. Cain won't quit, and men like him only grow bolder when folks bow their heads. If we're to have any peace, we'll have to carve it ourselves." Clara's eyes lifted toward the horizon where the land stretched endless and untamed. Her voice steadied. "Then let's start by taking back my father's land. It may be nothing but dry dirt now, but it's ours, or it was before Cain stole it with his lies." Jack studied her, This woman who had walked through shame and hardship, yet stood taller than the fear pressing down on her. He reached out, palm open. Then we'll make it ours again. She slipped her hand into his. Callous skin against delicate fingers, a bond sealed stronger than any law. The town of Red Rock was stirring now. Faces peeking out from doorways, whispers following the pair as they led the horse down the street. Some nodded with quiet respect. Others only watched, wary. But none dared raise a hand. The memory of yesterday's gunfight still hung heavy in the dust. Jack swung into the saddle, then extended his arm. Clara hesitated only a second before placing her foot in the stirrup and letting him pull her up. She settled against him, his arm steady around her waist. As the horse stepped forward, dust swirled behind them, catching the morning light. Clara glanced back at the town, then forward toward the horizon. The prairie rolled wide, scattered with sage and promise. Every mile a chance to build something new. Jack bent close, his breath warm against her ear. Whatever waits out there, Clara will meet it side by side. Her heart swelled, and she leaned back into him. That's all I'll ever need. And together, beneath the boundless western sky, they rode into tomorrow, two souls tempered by fire, bound by love, and unafraid of whatever storms the Wild West might throw their way. The sun sagged low on the horizon, bleeding red and gold across the plains. Dust swirled in the cooling air, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the faint echo of a piano drifting from Red Rock Saloon. Horses stamped restlessly at the hitching post, their silhouettes cut sharp against the fading light. Jack stood with Clara at the edge of her father's land. Land once lost, now theirs again after Cain had been driven out for good. The broken fence posts and dry soil no longer looked like ruins to her, but a promise waiting to be rebuilt. She turned to Jack, her shawl whipping in the evening breeze. "We could make it something again," she said softly. "A place where no man can take what's ours." Jack reached for her hand, rough fingers closing around hers with quiet certainty. The long trail of dust and blood behind them seemed to settle into nothing in that moment. He tipped his hat back, eyes meeting hers with a tenderness she hadn't thought possible for a man so hard-worn by the West. "You've got me now," he said, voice low, steady as the earth beneath their boots. "That's all you need." Clara's lips curved into a trembling smile, tears shining in her eyes. She leaned into him, the last light of the sunset crowning them both in fire and gold. Behind them, the saloon music carried on, the town alive again. Ahead lay only open sky and tomorrow. Together, hand in hand, they stepped forward, two souls weathered by dust and danger, bound by love, and ready to claim the West as their own.